If you have a mobile phone, if you'd like to put it on silent, please. Thank you. Right, huge welcome for the first time to Michael Goulding with who was Moses, what was the Ark of the Covenant, and are biblical accounts of the Exodus credible? Michael is a published author of several books and has the following websites: www.michaelgoulding.co.uk and www.legacyofthesphinx.com. During his research, prior to writing Legacy of the Sphinx, he discovered many strange facts pertaining to the true science and their suppression from humanity. Michael's focus on these prominent stories attempts to expand on the biblical accounts of these events with links to modern day physics, hitherto undiscovered, or were they? Please welcome Michael Goulding.
First of all, can I say I'm really pleased to see you in the audience, and thank you for coming tonight. I am, as Rob says, a published writer and an author. I've published a number of books over the last 10 years, the first of which was Legacy of the Sphinx. The Legacy of the Sphinx was a real bomber for me because I'd originally chosen the subject because it was one that I was particularly interested in, which was ancient mysteries. And when I first began to look at the possibility of it as a theme for the book, I realised that it required an awful lot of research. Because I'm one of those people who, if I'm going to have a theme to a book, I have to have the tip of the iceberg written about on the page, and the whole of the iceberg underneath, and be very familiar with it and know it backwards and forwards. So I had to do the research, and I didn't know at that time that it was going to take me 5 years. But it took 5 years, and I think you'll understand as I go further into why the difficulty, and some of the difficulties that I have, which I will talk about. But at the time I was beginning to sort of research it, another author published his book on ancient mysteries, and he called his the Da Vinci Code. And so whilst he didn't steal my thunder exactly, his came out, he became a multimillionaire, and I stand before you tonight as a relatively unknown author and a very poor one. So congratulations to Mr. Brown, and let's hope I can go a bit further with this as I go on with my writing career. I started quite late, as you can probably see, but I write every day, all day. I'm a professional writer now. I give it my job to do it, and I enjoy every minute of it. So that's me. I'm going to talk tonight, as you know, about Moses, and some of the difficulties of researching events that took place hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, are particularly time-consuming and problematical. At the beginning of the talk, I will tell you a little bit about some of those problems, which I'm sure some of them you will appreciate anyway, but some of them you may not. And I'm then going to go on to talk about Moses, who he actually was, his origins in actual fact, and then his exile, because he was exiled, as you know, and then I will go on to talk about his journey, that unbelievable journey that he undertook, and why he undertook it. And then I'll tell you about the ark that he built to take with him on his way, why he built it, and I'll tell you more about what it actually contained and what it actually did. And I think some of it will surprise you. Not all of it is in the Bible, and as you will be aware, not all of the Bible is anything that you think it is. It is in fact hand-picked, cherry-picked pieces of ancient manuscript which were highly selective, originally by the Roman Catholic Church, but also by other bodies, and they were put together in a selective manner to achieve certain objectives, not one of which was to provide you with the facts. Some of them were historical, of course. Exodus in particular is a book of near facts. But others, such as the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy, were books of the Bible that were purely public relations material. They were there to try to establish the law as the writers originally wanted people to believe it. I feel that the Bible is, in many ways, poorly written because it was so selective. But the number one problem with it is that the people who wrote it because they wished to, representing the elite perhaps, or even just themselves, because they wished to convince other people of the truth as they saw it, not necessarily the whole truth, and not even sometimes any of the truth. So the first problem that one has in beginning one's research is that these people told lies. They told a lot of lies, and they told lies wholesale. And you need to be able to pick through what they have to say in the various books to understand the origin of those books, and then select your material very carefully, and then analyse it very carefully. The biggest problem is that all of these records, these ancient records, had to be translated. And as you will perhaps appreciate, in the translation, some got lost, some got misinterpreted, and some facts, a lot of facts in fact, were facts as they saw them at the time. And if I explain to you that Hebrew manuscripts make no difference between what just happened yesterday, what happened in the distant past, and what happened thousands of years ago. So linguistically, they didn't distinguish between one tense or another. And so therefore, you have to pick your way through their translations to determine when they're actually talking about, in terms of year or date. But the real biggie is another one. First of all, can I ask, does anyone listening here tonight believe in God? Because my guess would be that some of you do, and some of you don't.
I believe in God.
And I would also ask, do you believe in miracles? That is to say, unbelievable events that take place or have taken place, which are totally inexplicable in the light of our present knowledge.
Yeah, don't quote 6-day death card.
And I would guess that if we would all agree, if we wanted to call those the paranormal, that there are inexplicable events that do take place, and these are paranormal, if not miracles. So it's very important to you for me to tell you my position before I start talking about the Bible and extracts from it and my interpretation of it. And I'll tell you that now. I do believe that there is a supreme being that guides everything.
Well done.
It may well be that it's the universe itself. Interpret it how you like, believe in what you like, but I do believe. But I am not a churchgoer. And I am not religious at all. And I don't belong to any faith, I don't subscribe to any particular philosophy. So I am, if you like, as far as possible, quite neutral. But by the time I got into this research, I was beginning to think, what is going on here? Because it was pretty obvious right from the start that something was going on in Egypt at the time, which was totally inexplicable and couldn't be explained by reading the extracts that are found in Exodus or any of the other books. Before I begin to cast serious doubts about what we all see and hear and feel around us, about the true nature of reality, and to cast doubts on so much of what you may have been taught about ancient history, let me say that one of the most remarkable events ever written about, the Exodus, is one of the best recorded events historically compared to most of the ancient history you will ever read about. If only some of it is partly true. In other words, if the vast majority of it is legend and you pick out those salient facts which you believe are important, if that is the case, then this Ark of the Testament has to have been one of the most unbelievably unusual and virtually unique artifacts in the whole of human history. Because what it is attributed of having done is defies logic, defies in fact the imagination. But tonight I'm going to hopefully shed some light on that. Let's talk about, just continuing with the business of the difficulties in undertaking any research of this sort, the different ancient manuscripts and the wording in some of them that has been interpreted and mistranslated over the years. I'll give you some particular examples. The word avod in ancient Hebrew meant quite simply work. Avod was work. Unfortunately, somewhere along the line, somebody mistranslated it as meaning worship. And therefore, people didn't go to work, they went to worship. And the places of working, the workshops, became temples. And so we have a misunderstanding right from the very beginning over this translation of the word avod. Because it didn't mean worship at all, it meant work. And the people who supervised that work were known as craftsmen. And their skills were partly esoteric, mainly metallurgical. And the job was handed down from father to son through the generations. And my case rests, therefore, with the case of Joseph, who was not a carpenter at all, as he became known as. He was, in fact, a craftsman. He was a member of a particular sect called the Essenes, of which more later, and he was no carpenter. He was a craftsman, and he was a very skilled craftsman, and he was revered for it and looked upon very highly for it. There are other examples of the same effects of mistranslation. But for now, let's just say that one of the other things that is never made clear in the Bible is that the place where Jesus lived, to take an example, was a seething cauldron of resentment, rebellion, politics and fight against the Romans. It was a totally alien culture. The language that Jesus spoke was Aramaic, and there are no vowels in Aramaic. So I would like you to think of any familiar object that you see around you, such as the desk, the chair, me, the walls, the curtains, and try to think of a word for them without using vowels. It's not easy, if not impossible. And Jesus spoke Aramaic. So if you or I were transported into Judea at the time of Jesus, not only would we not understand a word of what anybody was saying, but we would be lucky to get away without being stoned or hailed as the Messiah. And many of them were. We will at least last perhaps a week or two speaking as we speak, not understanding anything. And probably our best bet would be to make ourselves into a leper, which again many of them did. I think, therefore, that what became apparent to me fairly early on was that we don't know what Jesus' psyche was. We don't know what he actually said. We can't speak the language unless we have a professorship in Aramaic, and even then it is extremely difficult. If I gave you the word for God in Aramaic, they breathe it, and it's practically unpronounceable, and it's something that even I can't do, but I'll have a try. The word for God was and that's how he read it, and it became known as Yahweh in the printed page, and that became Jehovah, and as we know, that is, to all intents and purposes, for many religions, God. So we have our problems, and I'll mention one more which is important to mention because I talk about them throughout the lecture, and that is the difference between the Israelites and the Hebrews. The Israelites were descendants of Abraham's son, David, who moved into Egypt and settled there centuries before Moses was even born. They were already there in Egypt, an indigenous part of Egypt, along with, of course, the Egyptians and the Hebrews who had been captured and were used as slaves. Many of them lowly slaves, some of them, very few, upper class slaves or upmarket slaves, as we would say. But they were slaves, and that is a difference. The Hebrews themselves, as a race, were the descendants of Abraham, who lived in what we would now call Palestine, Syria, the Lebanon, and Israel. So I made that difference, and I'd like you to bear that in mind, because I talk about Israelites and I talk about Hebrews all the way through. What of Moses? Well, the Old Testament makes it absolutely clear, and there is no argument or controversy over this point, he was an Egyptian. He was, in fact, we now know, it is now accepted by most historians, but not all, that he was the son of the 18th dynasty pharaoh Amenhotep III. He was the illegitimate son, unfortunately for Moses. And I say unfortunately because it meant that being illegitimate, he could never succeed his father. But there was another problem for Moses, and that is that the Egyptian royal families were integrated by the means of incest. Incest was practiced throughout those families, generation to generation. But the succession was through the matriarchal line. So therefore, when a person became the new pharaoh, it was when the old pharaoh died, and he had to be married to the pharaoh's daughter. And the pharaoh conjoined with his own sisters, and the new man would then conjoin with the pharaoh's daughter. i.e. the matriarchal line. They did this because, as we now know, this taints the blood. The generation after generation, succeeding ones, are weaker, more infirm, and less capable of ruling. But they didn't know that. They thought the opposite. They thought that it purified the blood.